And welcome to tonight's debate, which is on the future membership of the NUS, which is the National Union of Students and the Students' Guild here at the university, whether we're going to stay a member or whether we're going to leave. You can vote online at the Exeter Guild website, and you find all the details about there, all about the referendum, all the different campaigns and their notes and stuff, for and against, on that website. So tonight we have four panellists. On the leave side, we're joined by Charlie Evans, Stephen Hawkins as well, and on the stay side we're joined by Laura Jane Tiley and Richard Brooks. Big round of applause. So just to run you through how we're going to do the debate this evening, we're going to start off with each panellist having 5 minutes just to give some opening remarks with their arguments and such forth. Then we're going to move on to opening up to the floor, to the audience. You have some time to ask any questions that you want to ask any of the panellists here. Please make them slightly more generalised rather than directing them at particular one candidate or panellist. Otherwise it's going to prevent other ones from responding. And then we're going to finish off with 2 minutes closing remarks from either side. So to start us off this evening, Charlie Evans from the Leave side. Thank you.
So thank you all so much for coming to the debate tonight. It's great anxiety with exams, and there's not just one referendum, there's two as well, the EU one having to make a decision as well. And thank you to Richard and Laura Jane as well. But I sit here tonight and I am unashamedly wanting this room to vote to leave the NUS. For the guildies among you, you may know that I led the campaign to leave the NUS 18 months ago, and indeed it was a humiliating defeat, I think it's fair to say. But after a bit of thinking afterwards, indeed I recognised that the referendum was the wrong timing, the wrong place, and the wrong arguments as well. And indeed no one had really, from Exeter, gone about trying to change the way NUS does things. So heeding those words, I thought, okay, let's run for NUS delegate. So I got elected as NUS delegate, and all of a sudden, out of thin air, it seemed like in March of this year, another referendum was launched, and I was just like, where did this come from? What a bombshell! And I seriously, I didn't have anything to do with it. And even if I'm a referendum trigger happy, and I thought actually it was a bit too soon. So then I went to a conference alongside the fabulous Laura Jane Tiley sitting beside me, with Beth and Michaela and Katie, and I genuinely went in with a completely open mind as to, and I was actually optimistic for positive change. But friends, then carnage unfolded before my very eyes. It was quite something. Despite the general pleasantness of the delegates, the ideas that were lofted about gave me enormous cause for concern. On a motion on students whether we should commemorate the Holocaust or not, the most heinous genocide of all time for history, some delegates genuinely stood up to oppose it because it wasn't inclusive enough, in their words. Conference voted to boycott the National Student Survey because it was institutionally racist and sexist. In the business school, I've seen great changes that have come as a result of the NSS. And I also voted to start censoring Yik Yak during student elections because of the anonymous trolls. I thought the whole point of Yik Yak is to be anonymous. Anyway. It also rejected giving every single one of you a say in national elections by voting down one member, one vote, which would have brought about reform. And finally elected Malia Bouattia as president, someone who has said, condemning ISIS would be a blatant justification for one Islamophobia. Yes, she might have passed it lately, but please, the first motion is here. Please tell me where in this motion it appears to condemn all Muslims. I simply don't know. And as someone else who has cited the Birmingham Jewish Society as being part of a Zionist outpost that would scrap the racist police, you know, the ones who protect millions of students most weekends on a night out. Again, we hear the words, though, let's reform the NUS. My question is, what attempt at reform has the state side made since last year? SABs, who are leading the campaign, didn't submit a single motion to conference and speak on any motions, squandering any opportunity for reform. We have to be real. NUS rejected this because if it passed, NUS politics would radically change forever, because it wouldn't continue to be the single-minded echo chamber as it is today. There would be pluralism, where issues such as paying fees for university education would be contested and not assumed. And instead of being a Jeremy Corbyn supporting union, it would be Corbyn supporters, Lib Dems, Blairites, Tories, Greens, Libertarians and anarchists in a union under one member, one vote. Has it done anything good? Of course, I would be foolish to say it's never done anything good. Historically, it's championed things such as disabled students' rights and LGBT rights. However, recently, because of the lurch further and further to a very small, extreme left, insisting on things like boycotts and just general hostility towards those in power, they no longer do these marginalised groups any service. In fact, they do them a disservice. Because anyone in any position of influence sees this organisation, to be frank, as a joke, and they do not take it seriously. Recently, disabled students' allowances have been cut as of maintenance grants, and let's not forget that FE institutions are also facing savage cuts. Of course, that does not excuse the government, but I just wonder if we had an NUS that was willing to engage with the political class and effectively lobby them, instead of giving up their voice on the table and taking pointless actions, such as classroom sit-ins, then the results we could get could be radically different. There is an alternative, of course, and that is to vote to leave. Over 20 universities now have called for referendums, all of whom want a different kind of national student voice. And we in Exeter have a great opportunity to begin a student political movement that revolutionises the way we do democracy.
Time. That's a good finish.
And now over to Laura Jane Tiley. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. As President of your Students' Guild, I'm elected to represent Exeter students. Every decision I've made this year, every campaign I've ran, every tweet I've written, is made with the sole purpose of representing you. When the NUS referendum was announced, I didn't immediately join the Stay campaign. Instead, I looked at the statistics, I spoke to unions who aren't affiliated, I asked students what they thought. I, like Charlie, went to national conference with an open mind. I weighed up the pros and cons, and my conclusion is that Exeter should stay in the NUS. As President, I am utterly convinced that Exeter students will be better off if the Guild does not disaffiliate. Because ultimately, we get more from the NUS than we give it. And I'll tell you how. So firstly, prices are cheaper on campus. The NUS are able to secure much better prices on goods sold in the RAM, the Lemmy and the Guild shop than we could ever get buying them as a single Guild. All in all, NUS membership has benefited the Guild between 8k and 29k per year since 2011. I tell you now, we receive far more money from the NUS than it costs us. The Leave campaign will and has disputed this, but I'd like to remind you that these figures are based on Guild annual, independently audited accounts, and also a comparison with TUCO, the largest purchasing consortium and most financially competitive, which is also used by unions outside of the NUS. The financial benefit to the Guild is greater if we buy through the NUS. This is a fact. And if we were to leave the NUS, cuts would have to be made. Prices on campus are expensive already. It's something that I've been lobbying against all year, but they'd probably rise even more if we don't stay. 2, students can benefit from an NUS Extra card. It offers us some completely exclusive deals on places like the Co-op, Pizza Express, Prezzo, Amazon, amongst numerous others. None of these are available through My Uni Days, and the money that My Uni Days makes does not go back to student unions. The cost of living is a growing problem for Exeter students. Do I want to throw away an opportunity for Exeter students to access valuable discounts in stores they actually use? Absolutely not. 3, liberation and rep training. Liberation campaigns are instrumental for students here at Exeter. We have hundreds of students in minority groups that are still to this day being neglected in terms of representation. But this year it's beginning to change. NUS has liberation and section committees who represent LGBTQ+ students, disabled students, female students, international students and postgraduate students. This year, 6 individual Exeter students have attended the conferences representing the student body. Not only is this vital because it allows students to network at a national level, but if we were to leave the NUS, all of these separate groups would get put together into one liberation role. How can one person alone ever know and represent the in-depth issues affecting all of these groups? And these ripples of change are becoming waves. This year, National Conference voted to start a trans liberation campaign and for the NUS to introduce a full-time trans officer. You simply cannot dispute the powerful way in which the NUS fights for marginalised students. I sit on a university sexual harassment task force. headed by Provost Janice Kay, and this is because of the research that NUS has done around sexual violence on campus. 4. A national voice for Exeter students. The Guild represents 19,000 students. The NUS represents 7 million. That's incredibly powerful. The NUS gains traction with government ministers and key organisations that the Guild could only dream of. But what has the NUS actually done? I'm not going to argue that the NUS is perfect, but there are countless examples when the NUS has not just attacked the government, but tackled the real problems that students like you face. The list is pretty impressive. I've lost my face. The NUS has raised the minimum wage, put lad culture and zero tolerance on the agenda in institutions all over the country, fought against and called out unpaid internships, exposed and eliminated hidden course costs all over the country, and made postgraduates known to possibility. And historically, the NUS are the reason you're exempt from council tax, the reason the voting age was lowered to 18, the reason that 16 to 25 rail cards are even a thing, the government U-turn on disabled student allowance cuts, the establishment of tenancy deposit scheme are all down to the NUS. And I challenge anyone to tell me that these things don't matter, that these things haven't benefited your student life in any way. This year, the NUS empowered me to oppose the government scrapping of maintenance grants on behalf of Exeter students. This empowerment came from being involved in making change on a national level. We may not have won the battle, but we put up a good fight. We will continue to fight for change within the NUS structures. The NUS is not perfect, but we shouldn't give up. Exeter is stronger than that, and it's braver than that. Megan Thunn's departing words of confidence were that we're stronger together, and how right she is. Skeptics argue that the NUS doesn't represent them, that the NUS is against freedom of speech, that it's convoluted with party politics. But the legitimate definition of the NUS is a confederate of student unions, and therefore I want you to remember one thing. The NUS does not direct us, we direct the NUS. We tell the NUS how to represent us.
Time. Okay, Stephen Hawkins, you have 5 minutes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to Laura Jane and thank you, Charlie, for what you've said so far. Now, unlike both of the people who've spoken so far, I voted 18 years ago to leave. 18 months ago. I voted 18 months ago to stay in the NUS, and I've swapped camps now. I did so because I was promised by the same team that's campaigning now that there would be reform. And as was brought up, the NUS does have flaws. The NUS has pretty large flaws that need to be changed. And I was promised reform, just like you're hearing now, that the NUS is capable of reform, that the NUS will change, and that all we've got to do is to change it. That the NUS is broken, but we can get together and fix it. But the issue is nothing they said about reform 18 months ago happened. In fact, it wasn't even attempted. And instead, we've had the worst conference for the National Union of Students in years. And let's be clear, the NUS hasn't changed for the better. The NUS continues to get worse and worse. Whether it's the NUS passing motions to restrict the use of yik-yak, whether it's the NUS condemning white men for appropriating black women, whether it's its officers refusing to share platforms with gay rights activists like Peter Tatchell, or anti-racism activists like Hope Not Hate Nick Lowe's. Again, we see the NUS getting worse and worse and worse. But do we honestly think the NUS can represent us? Do we think the NUS can give us a voice? We heard this argument. And I just want to give a quote by Kenneth Lewis, which I think is quite poignant about the NUS and about student politics. He says, calling attention to student militancy would appear to be hardly necessary to anyone who's read the newspapers in the last week or so about the events that have taken place. We got used to seeing students engaging in all kinds of activities, from throwing red paint at foreign visitors, pelting ministers' cars or ministers themselves. He says, violence and ill temper have apparently become part of the student world. He says, I think it's very easy to write this off as a series of escapades, a series of anomalies. But we've got to recognise there has been a change in student protest and student politics for the worse. Most of the students at our universities, and I would say the vast majority, from 90% to 95%, are hard-working and conscientious. But it's this minority who are seeking to create hell. Now, Kenneth Lewis said this in 1968. In 1968. The argument does not change. It doesn't matter whether it's 18 months ago, it doesn't matter whether it's 50 years ago. The NUS has always failed to represent students properly in this way. We heard about the achievements of the National Union of Students. I'd like to list some of my own. The unions were horrible in the 70s, where they stopped Peter Tatchell, when he was younger, campaigning for gay rights in East Germany because it would harm the communist movement. It was horrible in 2006, when they invented the NUS extra card by selling off student benefits which we already received to fill a £451,000 deficit and £2 million debt they accumulated from mismanaging our finances. And it's rather ironic now we're hearing how great the NUS's finances are. It was horrible in 2011 when they were dealing with the coalition government to decrease student grants and loans by 61%. It was horrible in 2014 when they pushed their Liar Liar campaign to get rid of Lib Dem MPs and Lib Dem Labour marginals. It's broken then and it's even broken now when they're in the middle of massive anti-Semitism scandals, after a decisive rejection of one member, one vote, which would finally empower students to have the right to vote. All students have the right to vote in the NUS. It was horrible when it decided to claim to be fighting anti-Semitism while simultaneously removing Jewish representation from the anti-fascism and anti-racism campaign team. And the list just goes on. I just want to end with this. As Charlie said, the NUS has become, to a large extent, an echo chamber of the far left, of a very far left, very authoritarian far left group. And I'm not far left, I'm quite centrist, and I don't feel like I have a voice in the NUS. I don't feel like my views are represented. When Malia Baratier is saying things like she wants to abolish the police, when we have a leadership who seems entirely against, when we had a conference where people were jeered at for saying they were conservative, I don't feel at all that the NUS wants to even speak for me. And that's why I want to leave the NUS. It's been inadequate as a campaigning organisation. It's shown itself completely incapable of reform. And frankly, it's shown itself completely without any desire to represent me.
Time.
And finally, Richard Brooks. Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me. My name is Richard Brooks and I'm the Vice President of Union Development and Deputy President of NUS. I'm not a Jeremy Corbyn supporter. I'm not a member of any political party actually. I played sports at uni. I speak to the government quite often, quite regularly. I've never thrown paint on them. I'm not sure anyone at NUS ever has actually. I have shared a platform here at Tatchell, did it on Monday on BBC News. And I voted for Megan Dunn as National President. So I just wanted to spell a couple of myths there, if that was alright. I guess the bit I want to start off with is, what is NUS? And Laura's kind of hit it on it already. But it was formed in 1922. It's had a long and illustrious and sometimes not so illustrious history. I can't defend stuff happened in the 70s. I wasn't born, sorry guys. But we are a confederation of 600 student unions across the United Kingdom. And I'm aware that the stuff you will have heard or are aware of, usually my opening gambit when it comes to student unions, is NUS is known for two things. One is the NUS extra card, and the other is shouty politics. And actually, the stuff that we do is far more wide than that, and I want to talk to you about it a little bit. So, one is that, we do the national voice, we do the campaigning and the lobbying, and we speak to government very regularly. We have done that successfully a number of different times, and I can talk to you about that. We do union development, so that's the bit that I'm in charge of in particular, which is where we develop and support student unions. So, student unions that look like they're about to go under, everything from legal advice all the way through to support, training, networking, all of those things. And we also co-create wealth with student unions. So the purchasing consortium that I imagine we're going to talk about tonight is a £60 million purchasing consortium where we can block buy stuff, lobby people and buy things cheaper basically for student unions and students. And through that we save students money. And the first stat I will throw at you is some of you guys will be aware of that we have a deal with Co-op for the NUS extra card. That is not a deal that's in any way available to anyone else. Since we did that deal about 20 months ago now, we've saved students £2.2 million in Co-op. So that's the sort of thing we do, basically. I was going to do a really big, long, impressive list, but Laura already got to me in terms of the stuff that NUS does. And I've been asked a number of times this week, and I find it a bit of a weird question to be entirely honest with you, like, what does NUS do for normal students? And I'm not entirely sure what people mean by normal students, unless they mean basically a white, straight bloke like me. But I think they mean, like, wide-ranging stuff. Like, I think they mean, and when I'm asked that question, I think people ask, like, how have we affected the majority of students? And yeah, there's the stuff about the fact that we don't pay council tax, and there's the 16 to 25 rail card, and there's the student insurance, which didn't exist before NUS lobbied for it, and the student bank accounts actually didn't exist before NUS lobbied about it. And there's stuff around like non-academic sanctions, so students now can't get stopped from graduating because they haven't paid the library fines, which used to happen. There's the increase in the apprentice minimum wage. There's all of those things. And actually, one of the things that I did want to say that hasn't been mentioned is that in 1994, the government of the day tried to shut down students' unions. And I think they're going to do it again at some point, by the way. And it was under the 1994 Education Act. And NUS stopped that happening. And actually all of the stuff that you like and care about, and some of the stuff that you dislike as well, around sports teams, societies, campaigning, volunteering, cheap bars, cheap drinks, all of the fun things that students' unions do, simply would not exist if we hadn't worked together with students' unions to stop that happening. And if you don't believe me, after this I would suggest you Google what happened to Australia and New Zealand when the government basically shut down students' unions there, because they just don't exist anymore. And that's something I'm really, really proud of, actually. So yeah, NUS has had a lasting and significant impact on students' lives. NUS continues to do so, and I did want to make that really clear. I am not going to sit here and defend everything NUS has done or said, and I'm not going to sit here and say NUS is the greatest organisation ever. And actually, when I first ran to be Vice President Union Development, in the I got re-elected at the worst one, right? I won't tell that person. When I was elected in 2013, the things that I said were about how NUS seemed too divisive, NUS didn't seem representative. Thank you. And how it didn't feel like it represented students, and actually those are the things we're dealing with now. NUS is democracy. Everyone at our national conference was elected and voted democratically on things, and I'm happy to have a conversation about NUS's democracy. We were already reforming it. It was one of the things that I put in my manifesto. Next year's national conference, we're going to bring a new democratic model to national conference. That is happening already, and I would very much like Exeter students to be in that room to make sure that you can change NUS, because we want to change. Our new membership contribution model, which is affiliation fee to you guys, is also coming to national conference next year. So we are doing a number of significant things that will fundamentally change the way in which NUS works. The only reason, really, in the final bit, we get in the room to talk to government and do the things we talked about, whether or not that's delaying DSA cuts or if that's getting students admitted from council tax, is because we're a unit, we're together. The only reason I get to sit in the room with government ministers and say that is because there are 600 students' unions in the country. If Exeter leave, if other people leave, we won't be able to do that anymore. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're now going to open up the questions to the audience this evening. You can get involved in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #StayOrGo. Are there any questions? Shall we start off at the back with the glasses? Yeah.
So I remember this time 18 months ago when we were having the same discussion, Charlie was on the panel as well, and the second thing he argued about, after being 5p off a pint, was that he was furious that the NUS wasn't supporting the free education movement, they didn't support the demo. And now he's come here today and say that NUS hasn't reformed at all. Well, they have started to support the free education movement, that's a huge change. And now in your speech you're saying, why do we take free education as a good thing? Why can't we debate about it? I'm sorry, you don't represent students if you think that's something that needs to be debated about. People need to have free education. We can't afford to go into tens of thousands of pounds of debt after we graduate.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, Marcel, with respect, whether we like it or not, whether you think it's no, please, hang on, please, let me finish. I stood at NUS conference. I stood on stage and I said, I support free education, but we have to. Please let me finish. But we have to say how we're going to bring that about. If we're not being pragmatic about how we're going to bring that free education forward, then the government is going to laugh in our faces time and time again. And time and time again on this stage in NUS conference, we heard meaningless platitudes such as tax the very richest. But we never say how on earth are we going to actually bring that about. So my position and this motion about free education has never said, and the NUS has never said, what is a realistic prospect in bringing about free education. And if that is never argued for, how are we going to bring that about? I'm sorry, the government is never going to listen to us, and that's why we need pragmatic voices within the student movement. And we also need, even though I support free education in principle, we need students across the country who don't support free education to have that voice and actually have a debate about it, because that's what students do at university.
Okay.
So that's what I'd say to that.
Richard.
I guess there's a couple of things really. One is that, for those of you who don't know, NUS has had a policy of about 15 years, up until 2 years ago, to support graduate tax and not free education. There's been debate basically every single year. Everyone loves talking about free education at a national conference. So they debate every single year. 2 years ago, conference democratically decided, after a lot of debating, to support free education. One of the things that we did after that was we published something called the Roadmap to Free Education, which was actually co-authored by the then Vice President of Higher Education, Megan Dunn, which you can find online if you'd like to. And actually, I do think it's absolutely NUS's role to be able to articulate, and I think we do this quite a lot, but this gets lost in the headlines of, when NUS are X, Y, Z, is articulate a vision of what tertiary education should look like. And I think we should be able to say, this is what we like higher education to look like, this is what we want further education to look like, this is what we want apprentices to look like. I don't think, and I don't think anyone thinks that free education or that vision of that education is going to happen tomorrow. I don't think that's the point of that. I think we talk about where we want to be and then work towards it. And every time, we are in meetings with government ministers, Megan as National President and Sarana as Vice President of Higher Education, articulate why that is, the economic benefits of that, and how we can get there. I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable. We don't shout outside and scream at anyone. It's mandated policy that's democratically decided at a national conference, and if people want to change it, come to national conference next year and change it back.
Okay, any further questions?
What, is it on the same thing? I don't know, not further questions on that.
It can be
More.
anything, yeah.
Anything. Cool. So I'm Grace Fish, I'm the Ex-President from FXU, founder Exeter Students' Union, so we're the corner branch, you guys. So it'd be good to have a bit more explanation from both sides of the room, from the one member, one vote, because obviously for us, we voted against this motion because that's a huge implication on smaller specialist institutions, FE unions and colleges, for those student unions who don't feel represented, because basically we'd be underrepresented in that conversation. So I'd be quite interested to hear both the Leave sides' views on one member, one vote, but also the Stay campaign, because for us, that's very much a motion that we voted against.
Okay, Steve, do you want to start on? Have you got any remarks on that?
What
Okay, Charlie, you can go.
Well, there's a reason why I support one member, one vote, and why I'm really, really passionate about it. It's because there are so many students up and down the country who don't feel engaged with their national movement, and I think one member, one vote is a principle of every single student, regardless of background, having a say, voting for your president. I mean, I think it's easily done. You can vote for, on the Guild website, we vote for our sabbatical officers quite easily, online with a little registration code. And I support it because we've seen so many voices that don't feel like they are engaged in the student movement, and that's, I think, partly why the Leave side at the moment is on 68%, because there are so many people that aren't feeling engaged. And I don't believe that. I think people like myself will vote consciously on how we can represent smaller and specialist institutions as well. And I don't think the students are in places like the University of Exeter or the Students' Guild are, completely detached from what goes on. I would personally vote thinking, okay, how can we give smaller and specialist institutions a voice? In fact, further education institutions have consistently there's a theme in conference that they are underrepresented, and that's come from the current system. So I don't understand how one vote make that any worse.
Can you clarify how one member, one vote is different to the current system? Just for anyone who doesn't know.
So the current system is people vote for people like Richard, his position, for the delegate system at the moment. So in many student unions, you vote for 4 or 5 NUS delegates, and there's been under 1% turnout for those elections, and then they're meant to represent the whole students' union, 18,000 students in my case, and vote for the NUS president and the vice president. And I just don't think that is, I think that completely, this happened in October, there was such a low turnout, I don't think that's the most democratic means of doing it, and I think, why can't everyone have a voice?
Can I just come back on that as well, though? Because, so say you can't get 100% turnout on your own guild elections, how do you expect your students to get 100% turnout on the national elections?
Well,
Yes, Steve, yeah.
To me, it's the main problem with the way we talk about one member, one vote is a democratic deficit, essentially. People, I personally think, as much as I can talk about the Guild, I think the Guild is actually a fantastic example of student democracy because of the engagement, because of the impact we hold. And I know that, well, I think we do. I think actually a lot of people know who their subs are, especially compared to a lot of other universities in the country. And there is that connection. With all due respect, I do feel like I'm connected to Laura Jane as a sub. I do think she can represent me. I don't feel like an NUS delegate with less than 1% of the vote can represent me. I don't feel like they have the mandate to, I don't feel like they have the remit to, especially when, I mean, we've been out campaigning all day today, talking to students, and most people go, NUS, what is that? And when they bring up the NUS delegates, they'll go, how were they elected? I didn't even know this took place. Now, when you don't even know an election's taking place, I think there's a bit of a problem here. I think that's what we need to start changing. We need to start looking at that to bring that connection between people again.
Okay, Laura, don't you think that one member, one vote would actually engage more students and get more involved in NUS politics?
From what Stephen said, I think actually what you guys are talking about is a reflection on the Guild, and we need to do more to get people to realise what NUS delegates are and what that means and what impact they can have, which is huge, really. We did actually have more candidates this year, and we had more people voting. It's a slight increase, but it's something, and we can continue to build on that. I don't think that one member, one vote would be beneficial, because you have to have faith in your leaders of your students' union to represent you and your delegates, and you put your faith in them and you elect them democratically to do that. So yeah, that's how NUS works, and I think that's a lot more effective.
Can I come back to that very quickly? The entire purpose of democracy is that I don't have to have faith in my leaders that they'll do the right thing.
You elect them. You elect them to.
Well, I didn't know I could vote. I didn't know I could vote.
Okay.
Most people didn't know
When
they
there's
could
lots of
vote.
elections.
It'll be NUS delegates, that's the topic of the
Can we just let
discussion.
Richard have a second? I was going to say a couple of things. As I said before, I am not going to sit here and defend NUS's democracy as is. We are already doing a democratic review. It is going to next year's national conference. If you are not affiliated to NUS, you can't be a part of that. That's number one. Number two is that if you have a problem with representative democracy, you have a problem with Parliament, you have a problem with like the American system, and I don't hear from the Leave side. Thank you. And I don't hear necessarily clamourings from the Leave side about democratic reform of the UK Parliament. SUs are.
Oh, Richard, are we here to discuss the democratic deficit of the House of Lords?
I don't know.
With all due respect, this is why people get annoyed at the NUS, because we're discussing the NUS, how it can reform, and you bring up the government.
Then you interrupted, so I'll carry on, which is that, as I said about one member, one vote, I don't necessarily think it's the right thing. And I've said a number of reasons why, and we talked a little bit about it. Like I said, I think students' unions are the representative voice of students, and we should help them. I think that there is low turnout in SU elections by NUS delegates, and that's a problem, and we need to support students' unions to increase that. I do think that it would have a disproportionate impact on, in particular, FE and small and specialist institutions, and actually, they are the majority of membership, so people don't realise this, but when we bandied around the 7 million number for students, actually like 2/3, 3/4 of them are actually from FE and small and specialists, and they wouldn't be able to vote because they don't have the capacity, and they're not as lucky as places like Exeter or like Hull, where I'm from, to be able to host online elections, which you would need to be able to do that. I'm not preempting any of that. I'm actually really happy to talk about like democratic reform of NUS, but like I said, you need to be a part of it to reform it. It's going to come to national conference next year, and we're going to be consulting on that this year. So I guess my plea to you guys is, if you, like me, aren't actually particularly happy with NUS's democracy, please remain a part of it so you can help us fix it.
So the unfortunate situation at the moment is that a lot of SUs with their delegates they send to the NUS don't have very much legitimacy because they're not letting the students vote.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that they're trying to tackle, is trying to get more students involved and engaged. So what is the NUS going to do over the next few months, next year, to actually get more students involved if you're not going to introduce such a system?
So, like I said, I don't know what that system looks like. To be entirely honest with you, I don't want to preempt a democratic review. We've got to ask like students and students.
Well, it's not even down to reviewing of democracy, it's how to get more students
Well,
involved.
I think that there are. So one of the things that I would be interested in is that Scotland do a thing right now, actually, where they host all of their student union elections within the same week, so they can do things like a cross-city campaign that might not work in Exeter, but in places like Manchester, for instance, and something that would be useful. I think we can do more to actually know when student unions are hosting their elections, because they don't always tell us, and we can find out that information and give them resources and support to be able to increase turnout. We have information on students that they allow us to have, so when they agree to things like, when you buy their NUS Extra card, you know, like the little boxes on the bottom that say, would you like to receive information? If you click yes on that, I think we could probably do more about messaging students and telling them that their NUS delegate elections are happening. there are a number of different things. I would say, and this isn't to pass the buck a little bit, that, and Laura has said this, is that it is that genuinely not NUS's sole responsibility for election turnout at every single students' union, and we do have a role, I absolutely believe in supporting that, but I do look at students' unions to figure out how they can do that as well.
Okay, Charlie?
I just want to come back to Richard in terms of cost of further education colleges implementing one member, one vote. I mean, the fact that 2/3 of NUS members are further education students, that to me suggests actually that further education students under one member, one vote will have a greater say actually than higher education. And if we look at the cost of how much it costs to send delegates from a students' guild or whatever to go to Brighton, put in a 4-star hotel on the Brighton coast, I can guarantee you that is far more expensive than having an online platform allowing every single the opportunity for every single member of the students' union.
4-star hotels. What are you saying? I didn't say yeah, no, and like there is absolutely a cost in going to conferences, and sometimes that's prohibitive for people. We offer things like grants for students' unions who are from smaller and specialist institutions, so they can do that. It is still cheaper to be able to spend, because actually, like, and if you look at the Guild have some figures on this, it's actually about £1.5 per year to send people to conferences. It's actually far cheaper to do that than to create a website and do upkeep and maintenance and full-time staff support, which you would need to run an election website. It's actually quite hard. So it's easier, it's cheaper to do the delegate system. Like I said, I'm not actually against any forms of democratic review that you guys are talking about. I just want you guys in the room to discuss it. That's my main point from this.
Wait, so are you saying that it costs roughly each student union about £1,000?
No, I mean, that's for Guild.
You've got
I'm quite the
600
Guild.
unions who are a member of your organisations. That's, you know, a lot of money. And yours, so that's like £600,000. So isn't that's quite extreme in, you know, supporting a website? And it costs a few pounds to buy a web domain, and then maybe get a few volunteers.
I think the deeper point as well is that what we're saying is we love to have a democratic reform, but we just don't have it in the budget.
Okay, I'm
We
going
don't
to
have it in the
We're
budget.
doing a democratic.
I'm going to move on to another question now. Yeah, down the front.
Thank you very much. My issue with the news side is that there's a wave of dangerous rhetoric going over here, and I just want to pick up on that, because if your argument for leaving the NUS is based on yik yak and, you know, your claims of it being anti-Semitic, I can't pronounce his surname, or you sort of like ignoring the fact that the NUS has represented students from ethnic minorities, as a Muslim, as a black woman, when you two, like, I'm sorry to bring this up, tried to set up a Quilliam Society on this campus, right? Which, wait, let me finish.
I'm getting your question there, and let them answer now. I'm not going to say that's right. I'm going to keep the dangerous rhetoric, and we'll let them answer from that.
I won't mention the Quilliams.
Okay, just finish off.
The reason why I was mentioning it is because with a campaign like Students Not Suspects, as a Muslim student, I feel that NUS represents me, and people from the Islamic Society, I can't speak for everyone, but members have come up to me worried by this Leave campaign, because you are ignoring the good things that the NUS does. If you have an issue with it, try to at least acknowledge what he suggested, that they're trying to improve the democratic process. And where does the assumption come from that one member, one vote will fix things, right? Where do you come up with that assumption?
So can you tackle the dangerous rhetoric?
So firstly, there are. Sorry, Steve, go for it.
Okay. So, look, I'm not sure what. If there's anything particularly that I said that you think is dangerous, please hold me up on it. And I'll have to admit it. But I've been trying to keep it very particularly about this conflict between, because like as they say, there is big problems with the NUS, and I think we can admit it does do great work, especially for black and ethnic minority students, especially for transsexual students, and especially for LGBT minorities. But part of our problem is when you take the good and the bad, you have to start weighing it up against each other. So, I mean, for example, one of the roles I'm currently the treasurer-elect of the National, it's a very long title, but the National Atheist, Humanist and Secular Student Societies, which essentially means I'm involved in quite a lot of the national atheist campaigns. One of which we had quite a few months ago, which in the news quite a lot, was at Goldsmiths University, where the Goldsmiths AHS, which was set up by a large group of ex-Muslims, essentially can't hold events now because they have Muslim, and because the Islamic society there don't like them. I'm not saying they're definitely not representative of most Islamic societies across the country. It's an incredibly bad example of how they should run. But the problem is they could no longer organise events. They essentially got blacklisted from a university because they hosted an ex-Muslim doing a talk. And the NUS simply didn't get involved to help us out. And it comes down to this awkward politics where if you're in a certain minority, the NUS represents you, and if you're in another minority, the NUS doesn't. It's, again, I'm going to bring it up, but when the Jewish students' representative was removed from the anti-racist and anti-fascism campaign, when their position was got rid of, on the same day as saying we condemn anti-Semitism, I just don't understand what the logic is. If it wants to represent all minorities and try to give everyone a platform to let their voice be heard, then it should be doing that equally and fairly. And the NUS does do good work to an extent with fighting against prevent. But when it goes to these extreme lengths where, I mean, I think you know this, I have a problem with Muazzam Beg, who's one of the spokespersons for the Student Not Suspects campaign, who said things like the Taliban was the best thing that happened to Afghanistan in 25 years. I have problems with these being the spokespersons for these campaigns. So what I'm trying to get at is I don't feel the NUS really represents minorities fairly and equally. I don't feel the NUS is doing enough to actually make pragmatic change, because when you've got these representatives, when you're doing these actions, how can the government take you seriously? How can anyone take you seriously?
Well, they are taken seriously.
Okay.
Well, the only time the NUS has been mentioned in government, I'll say this very quickly point, the only time the NUS has been mentioned by this Parliament was to criticise it, to point out the problems it's having with these associations with Cage.
Okay, do you want to respond to that?
I mean, firstly, that's just not true. So I don't want to say to that part, that's not true. So yeah, we do loads of work with government, and we always have done, and we speak about each other sometimes nicely, sometimes less so. That's how that works. We hold them to account. Firstly, the second point, sorry, and I'm actually really glad you brought this up because I want to make a distinction really clearly, because loads of people keep doing this. NUS is not responsible for every single thing that a students' union does. So students' unions are autonomous. So this comes up with policy as well. So we can talk about all the YAC stuff and the stuff at the national conference that you guys might not like. Like, we can't. That's not policy for you. Like, we can't tell you what to do. And student unions are separate to NUS. So when it comes to things like goldsmiths, I am not. That wasn't anything to do with NUS. And if you'd asked for help, if I got that email, I would have helped you. But I don't know anyone who has contacted NUS. And if there was, I apologise, didn't respond. But that wasn't me. The third thing on anti-Semitism, Megan Dunn, our national president currently, has time and time again, and I've supported as deputy president, has articulated the fact that there is anti-Semitism within the student movement, and in particular across the left. That is a problem. We condemn that entirely, and we're doing a number of things about that. And I am not, and I want to be absolutely clear that no one at the leadership of NUS, and I think I get to say this as deputy president, in any way undermines the fact that there is anti-Semitism happening on crack campuses right now, and we're doing a lot of things to support UJS in particular to be able to deal with that. The fourth thing I just want to say, and this is the final point, sorry, was just on prevent. So, prevent and ARAF. So, I quite publicly didn't support the vote that you're talking about. I voted against the vote in terms of the ARAF convener. Again, it was a democratic vote of people who were elected for at national conference. You can absolutely have a problem with the democracy, but they were all elected there. I didn't agree with that, but that's how that goes. You lose votes sometimes in a democracy. And prevent in general, I've also been quite publicly clear. I have a number of other people that I don't necessarily agree with our actual stance on prevent for a number of different reasons, and I am anti-prevent and can go into that in many detail. But I guess the point I'm trying to say is that it is a democracy. There is pluralism, and I struggle sometimes to marry two ideas, which is that I often get shouted at by people who consider themselves freedom of speech activists about debate and democracy and pluralism and stuff, whilst at the same time they're not necessarily recognising the fact that like NUS has debate and democracy and pluralism, and sometimes things that I agree with and maybe things you agree with win, and sometimes they don't. And I would like people to agree with me all the time at NUS, but they don't, and that's okay because sometimes you lose votes.
Okay, and very quickly.
Yeah. Well, I just want to bring up one example of Durham and Durham disaffiliated. One of the main reasons that Durham disaffiliated wasn't from a lack of action with the NUS, but because the NUS sent them an email. They were hosting a controversial speaker on campus. I forget the exact name. of a person. But the NUS sent an email saying, if you hold this event, we will hold a colossal demonstration against you. We will send in busloads of protesters to try and stop this event taking place. And I don't feel... I mean, look, I think you are the kind of person that we like in the NUS, but you don't represent the movement. I think it's good, but you don't represent the movement where it's going. I mean, you say this, you're anti what the NUS are doing in Prevent, but that's the way it's going. That's why Malia, who led the campaign, was the one who was elected.
Okay. Any further questions? Yeah, down here, Jack. Yeah.
Yes, I would firstly like to take up on one point. Why would a one-member, one-vote activist question the US presidential election when there is universal franchise for the presidential election but also a legislature? But more to the point, this idea that we keep hearing to just engage is surely completely inadequate. When the NUS is already failing to represent students, people already feel disengaged, so they don't vote. So people keep going in. And what happened this year when people did engage? There was hype in Exeter and there was hype in Oxford about certain skeptics being elected. What happened? A motion was passed that NUS money should not be spent and invested in students, but spent on radical actions like, shall we say, and how did these radical actions go in the past? Well, if you were on the fence about a tuition fee rise, an image of a fire extinguisher being thrown from a building isn't exactly going to endear you to the anti-tuition fee rise side. And what happened the next day? The next day, that very same speech by Harry Samuels imploring for the NUS to invest its money in student services was openly mocked by an NEC delegate. Why, when the NUS is palpably going the opposite way to actually helping students, would there be any incentive for an ordinary student to leave as opposed to hit the NUS's pocket by disaffiliating and then that affiliation fee doesn't go to the NUS? Why?
We all right? Right, let's see.
Let's try and keep your answer short.
Yeah, I mean, three things. One, I would challenge people straight off on. Everyone keeps talking about NUS like it's this really random, like autonomous block that's just like a thing. Everyone keeps going the NUS, and actually, when we talk about NUS, what we're talking about is individual actions of officers or people who you don't necessarily like. And you may not like some of the stuff they've done, and I may not like them, but they're also like individual people and not necessarily the entirety of everything that's NUS, which is an organisation with 600 members, 7 legal entities, and like it's quite big, like 220 full-time members of staff. So that's number one. Number two, like I said, I've tried to articulate why I think this time is different, and I know that you guys have been sold like false promises on this before. Like I wasn't in NUS 2 years ago. I was a full-time officer at Hull University Students' Union. You can see it covered. Basically not liking NUS, actually really quite vehemently disliking NUS. And I made sure to being involved in it because I wanted to change it. And if you spoke to anyone at my time in Hull, they would tell you that I didn't like NUS for all of the reasons that basically you guys were espousing. So I hope that's why this time is different in terms of democratic reform. I'm trying to think of the last point that you made, but I'm really afraid to ask you to ask the question again.
Oh, no. Why? Okay, so when we do engage,
yeah.
like people did in Exeter and Llewellyn did in Oxford, and it's actually implored, for instance, in opposition to the trade union motion, that money is actually spent on services that probably help students rather than protests. Not only is that rejected, but it is mocked the next day by a speech by an NEC member. Why, when they are mocking the idea that student money is spent on students, why is there an incentive to engage with that institution?
Like mocking shit, right? Like I don't in any way condone people mocking people for having the bravery to stand on stage, and I don't think that's okay. I don't know what to say apart from that. It's just not. And I hope that you guys on a Yik Yak right now, which we're not trying to ban, by the way. And the second thing is that, like I said, like he lost the vote, and I actually totally agreed with a lot of what Harry is. Harry, right?
Harry,
yeah.
Harry.
I totally agreed with what a lot of what he said, but again, he lost the vote, and there are, I don't know how I can explain this anymore, but there are loads of different things that I would change about NUS, but I keep losing votes in rooms. The reason why is because there was hype in Exeter, right, and there was hype in loads of different places, but other students' unions with said delegates, they felt like represented those students, and again, I'll take the point about the low turnout, we just got to improve it. But those people voted a different way, and I don't know what else to say apart from that, apart from the fact that, like, sometimes you lose votes even when you think that thing's the right thing.
Okay, Lauren?
I just want... The important thing for me is what this means to Exeter students, right? So I've heard from so many people over the last few weeks that they feel like the NUS doesn't represent them, and I hear that, and to some extent when I was a student I felt like that. But the two things. Firstly, and we've said it before, I'm going to say it again, we've got to be in it to change it, and we've got to have that voice, right? But also, what you're saying is really interesting, David, actually. Like, I think there's some things that the NUS have put money towards, have supported, that I don't agree with, and I think that that's not okay. But actually, I looked at all the motions from conference this year. There are 140 motions and amendments in total. 125 of them were about students and about actual student issues. And that's not bad. It's not perfect. It should be 140 out of 140. But that's pretty good to me.
Okay, Charlie?
Can I just come to that point Lauren Jane makes? So, fair enough. It's an admirable aim to be around the table and to reform it within. I do quite like to stress the point that it seems to be going completely opposite direction to the reformist. But on you personally, what motion did you submit to bring about a reform this year in the NUS?
Okay, I'm really glad you've brought up the issue of reform, actually.
But what motion?
So being part of the NUS this year, it's on my manifesto. I wanted for X to have a bit of better voice in it. To answer your question, I didn't submit a motion, or I wish I had done. But there's other things that we've done. We had a full-time member of staff with us at conference this year, live tweeting it. A lot of the unions used that live tweet as it was so transparent and comprehensive. We've sent all reps to Liberation conferences. We have more candidates standing for delegates. We provided all people going to conferences with training. I ran for a position on NUS in the purchasing consortium. I didn't get it, but I tried. And also, the allegation that the Leave campaign have said that we didn't try and engage in conference this year is ridiculous. Beth and our VP Education actually prepared a statement, but we ran out of time, we couldn't submit it. We tried to submit amendments. We went to NUS Locals conference this year. I don't want to go on, but there's so many things that we have done to try and engage and to try and reform it. And I think the argument that we haven't is kind of it's a little bit, it's just ridiculous.
Okay, I'm just going to give Stephen quickly.
So what you said is you wrote a statement but didn't say it.
Because they ran out of time.
You ran for an office but didn't get it. You paid for a full-time tweeter. Which, I'm sorry, if that's what you think democracy means to students, this is part of the problem. Students feel disenfranchised, not because someone isn't sending them 140 characters every 20 minutes about what's going on, about the newest amendment to the amendment of the vote. It's not what we're actually talking about. The issues is stuff like one member, one vote, where students don't feel like they have a chance to elect people who don't elect people in the NUS. It's the fact that students don't feel like they can even submit motions. It's the fact that students feel like, even when you write statements, when you have motions to propose, they don't go to the floor. You can't have the time to say it. I understand that we're trying. I do understand to an extent that we're trying. And I think the extreme blowback to every single... When you can't even make a statement, I think that highlights a lot, really.
Right, okay. And Richard?
I don't think it does. I think National Conference is a 3-day-long event. We elect about 60 different people at a conference. We pass all of our policy across 5 different democratic zones. We do a shit ton of reports and procedural motions because sometimes we want to change stuff. This is one of the reasons why I don't necessarily one member, one vote would work, because I can't ask students to basically sit in a room for 3 days and go through every single bit of policy we ever have. So that's the thing I want to say. And also, I don't think necessarily you have ownership over democracy. You come to cry democracy and try and win an argument. So that's one thing. And the point I was going to make about the reform of NUS shtick, as it were, is I can understand, I genuinely can understand, because it's been a point of particular frustration for me this year, that it looks like NUS from your perspective, and actually from my perspective in a number of different ways, looks like it's going in the wrong direction. And actually, if you don't look beneath those headlines, I can understand why. But what we have been doing in a number of different places, and whether or not it's on like the priority campaign, which was on student cost of living this year, so that was literally about students saving money, like the work we've done in Union Development Zone, which is my zone, which was specifically around sports teams, societies, volunteering, the work we've done on being based in student unions. We've got loads more staff now who are based in student unions who are speaking to and working with elected student reps. We're doing more things with like volunteer training, working with student leaders. So all of those things have happened in the last year, and I can understand that you read a headline in the Daily Mail about how NUS are about to take over London or whatever, that you would be concerned about its direction, and I can't pretend like I'm not. I voted in a different way. I voted in a similar way to I think what you guys did on a number of different things. Ultimately, we are changing. We will change more if you stick around, and I think you should.
Okay, very quickly. I don't think you are, though. I think that's the problem because as I say, one member, one vote. It is a big deal for me. I'm not going to lie.
You can tell.
I can tell. That was overwhelmingly rejected. I mean, we had so many welfare and education motions that didn't even make the floor, and instead we had 5 no confidence votes on the national, on the chair of the conference, and we had this rather, instead of hands going in the air at one point, we had something in which we had a delegate by delegate count of hands, which lasted about 40 minutes as well. We also had a motion on whether to remove the PKK from the terror list. I mean, why can't we debate issues at conference? I mean, debate what I mean is the welfare and education motions in its entirety, instead of doing these silly little no confidence things, having counts that last up to 40 minutes, and then have a debate about whether we should remove the PKK from the terror list.
Any further questions from the audience? Yeah, and the white.
You've already you just said it. It looks really bad when you quote Orwell or when someone says, I'm from Birmingham, and if someone says it's a Zionist outpost, it looks bad. And I would like to think I am the sort of person who is intelligent enough to do my own research, and I will go and I will look past the headline. But I don't think that every organisation has this problem to the same extent as the NUS. So I really, really want to stay, but you're really not giving me that many a reason to trust you and listen to you when you're saying that we should.
I think, like I said, I can only articulate why I think the things that NUS have done in the past that prove that it does have a positive impact on students' lives, the work that we've done over the last year, and the idea that only by students coming together do we get any of the voice in the room. Why the only reason I get to sit across, or anyone gets to sit across government ministers, is because we represent 600 student unions with 7 million members. But the thing about looking bad, I'm not going to do the traditional left thing of being the media are against us, or the smear or whatever, because I don't think that's helpful. Well, I don't think it's helpful. I think we need to be better, and I hold my hand up to that, at communicating more widely to students and student unions and wider society about the impact we have. I know we do. And I can only ask of all of you that, like I said, you stick around to be able to help us change in a number of ways that I've talked about, whether or not it's democratic reform, the campaigns we do, all the things we focus on. I understand the frustration. I genuinely do share it. That's why I ran to be a vice president, and I'm trying to articulate an alternative vision of what an NUS that could look like if the people in this room had more power. And my job, I think, over the next year is to try and give people like you more power.
Okay, and Steve?
Yeah, I think it sums up the debate quite nicely, what you've said, actually, because it's the Stay campaign is saying there's a lot of good and a lot of bad in the NUS, and we're saying there's some good and there's some bad in the NUS. The difference is the Stay campaign is saying that it can reform and improve, and we are saying it's getting worse and worse and worse. And I think the difference is we've kind of shown how it's getting worse and worse and worse. But you say that it's getting more democratic, and I'm not entirely sure how. I mean, take the democratic reform that you're saying you're investigating, which we don't know anything about at this moment in time.
Never doing one.
Or you're doing one, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Will this motion be able to be part? Do you think this motion, when we kindly pass one motion, one member, one vote, do you think massive radical reform is even possible within the NUS? Do you think the delegates will let it happen when we can't even get something as small as one member, one vote?
Well, yeah. I don't know. When you say something as small as one member, one vote, I don't think that is small. I think that was a big leap for a bunch of people who weren't necessarily ready for it. I do think that it was like we are already having a Democrat review. We're going to consult students' unions and students over the next year, and when whatever that motion looks like comes to, which I can't preempt, I don't know what it looks like. We will get people to vote on. And when you say other delegates,
but you just
sorry. I just want to make the point because there's a level of arrogance that I'm finding quite frustrating, which is that Exeter Students' Union and you as representatives of it are right and know entirely, and your democracy is clear and kind, and that you are representative of students. All of the other people in that room were also elected by students and students' unions.
No,
I think you missed the point, which is that I entirely understand, as I've said on a number of different occasions, the frustrations of NUS. That's why I ran to be an NUS officer. But what I am not going to do is sit here and say that every single other person who is democratically elected to be at national conference is somehow entirely wrong. Like, they were elected, they voted the way they wanted to. Sometimes I agreed, sometimes I didn't. But you and no one else in this room, including me, own the entirely right way to one NUS. Like, everyone gets to decide that.
But the point is, you're saying simultaneously that the NUS's democracy is fundamentally broken, which is why you're having this review, which is why you're saying that you wish one vote to pass, and yet you're saying that it's these NUS delegates who get to speak on our behalf. But I'm explicitly saying these NUS delegates do not speak on our behalf. I'm explicitly telling you, when someone only gets 1%, if not less, of the vote, they do not speak for the rights for the students. When an NUS delegation on top of that can't then pass one member, one vote, it pretty much tells you they don't want students to be able to speak for themselves. And I think that's quite bad. I know this has been quite a big thing actually. I know a lot of members of the Stay campaign have been saying, I'm appalled that we're even having this vote again after 18 months. I mean, I'm quite glad that we're having this vote again after 18 months, because it's good that we can discuss this issue. It's good that we can actually have a dialogue with students. It's good that we can all go out and talk to students as people walk around campus, because I think that's what democracy is. I don't think it's necessarily the vote. I think it's about engaging with people, listening to what they want, and then acting on their behalf. When you get less than 1% of the vote, you are not acting on people's behalf. When you are passing motions, and I'm sorry, it's 120 out of 145 motions on student issues isn't a success because 25 of them aren't even remotely related, therefore, to student issues. That's a problem. That's a big problem.
Okay, I just want to take some more sort of opinions and questions from the audience. I haven't really heard from many people. I'm just going to go down here in Polo.
Hypothetically, if you do leave, what would your vision of Exeter outside the university?
Okay, so very quickly, what's your vision?
So I think that we've got a mass movement of people across the country who are saying, look, we're fed up with the NUS 6 quote, essentially, about what's going on. Now, if as a result of, I think there's two options. I think as a result of massive disaffiliations, I think we're going in that direction. NUS finally wakes up and smells the coffee, and there's we actually need to change the way we do things around here. Then maybe we can have a conversation about re-affiliation. But and this isn't like the EU referendum where it's a once in a generation. Look, the fact that we've had a second debate about this 18 months later suggests that we continue to have this dialogue about whether we should be affiliated to the NUS. Alternatively, I mean, we've spoken to students across the country. They're up for their game for forming an alternative union, something that actually challenges the way that NUS does things, and actually something that connects students to its national voice instead of a students' union to a national union, therefore as a student link somewhere in there. We think that a national union of some sort should be connecting student voices to to a national union which is pluralistic, that has debate on everything.
Okay, Laura, what do you think would happen in Exeter?
Okay, so a big thing for the Guild, because I'm going to keep it about Exeter, about the Guild, and then Rich can talk about NUS more in general. The Guild have put figures together for this referendum debate, and the Guild are about, based on the figures, 20 grand better off by being in the NUS, and we would look to be losing about between up to 29 grand a year. Okay, so these are figures that are based on the best that we have. So we don't have the figures for 15-16, but we've got them for 14-15, and that's because we wouldn't be able to buy our products that we sell in the RAM and the Lemmy and the Guild shop we wouldn't be able to buy them from the NUS, so they would we wouldn't get the retrospective discount, and we also wouldn't be able to sell NUS extra cards as well. So yeah, the guild would look to be losing money.
Okay, Richard, on a more national scale.
The only thing I was going to say on a national scale is I don't think referendums are a bad thing at all. I'm glad that they're happening in the sense that I think that we should debate stuff like that, so I'm very comfortable to do that, and I'm very comfortable on a bank holiday Monday to get like a 2.5 hour train here. Like, that's absolutely fine. I think we should do that. The second thing I'd say in terms of like this mass movement of stuff, there are currently 6 students' unions, including Exeter, who are obviously already having one as of March, who declared a referendum. That number will probably go up, but it's not going to be that mass movement affiliation thing, and I think that's a bit of a false vision for what that would look like. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
If Exeter left, would you welcome them back in the future?
Of course I would. The people who I think lose out if Exeter disaffiliate from NUS would be Exeter students, because I think you'd lose money, you'd lose influence, you'd lose voice, you'd lose access to any number of different resources. And of course, like, this isn't a petty petulant thing. If you guys decided to like leave and then want to come back next year, of course we'd welcome you back, because Exeter SU I think is stronger when it's a part of NUS, and NUS is totally stronger when the guild's a part of NUS. So.
Okay, any further questions from the audience? Yeah, here in the glasses.
I find it quite funny that Stephen and Charlie seem to think that the solution to being underrepresented in a democratic system is to completely cut ties with that democratic system. So what I just want to ask is that since the NUS is the body that helps secure first month deposits for student housing, is, as they said, gaining the guild or benefiting the guild between £8,000 and £29,000. It helped increase the maximum disabled students allowance. It provides discounts, as you said. It helped fight against the illegal deportation of 48,000 international students. It helped secure exemption of students from council tax. The NUS has consistently been vital in these steps of national progress. And how do you imagine Exeter having any kind of a national voice if it does disaffiliate from the NUS?
Do you want to come on stage?
Okay, do you want to respond to that?
I think you're at a false start to begin with when you say we think the NUS is a good democracy at the very least. We don't think so. I think I've made that story quite clearly set out.
It's not good. It's a democratic system.
I don't think it's really, but I mean, I think if a democratic body has less than 1%, I mean, I think the PCCs are barely democratic, and that is 10%.
I don't think the question's about democracy.
But yes, so but with the national voice argument, well, the problem with the national voice argument is what I've been saying. We don't get. It's not a national voice when it gets less and less of a year of government, less and less actually representing students. Again, it doesn't. I can quite categorically say it.
But he's just listed a whole load of examples where the NUS
I can come on.
Can we go through the examples?
But it's a way. But for me, it's where the direction of NUS is going. So for example, recently the government hasn't listened to the NUS on making things like maintenance grants, on things like disabled students allowance, and I think that's because NUS is taking a series of decisions to boycott everything, to lose its voice around the table. I mean, Richard alluded to earlier how he disagrees with the NUS's position on prevent, because it loses the student voice around the table shaping that policy. I presume that's where he's coming from. And that's the direction where we're going in. It's increasingly kind of distancing, detaching ourselves. It voted to boycott, for example, the NUS, the higher education white paper before it's even been published, before it's even been produced. And it's this kind of just general hostility that we can do without student politics, but hostility before government proposals have been even published. I mean, it's ludicrous, and I think we're going to see.
I don't think that's anything to do with the fact that the government that we have now hates unions in general.
I think.
I mean, that actually genuinely was one of the points, which is that we have a majority Conservative government, and they often are deaf, and this isn't politics, they are often deaf to the concerns of students and young people, and I don't think we should underestimate that. On the 3 points that were mentioned, maintenance grants, DSA and TEF, again, I think I just want to be clear about what actually did and didn't happen. So maintenance grants, the government tried to push through one of the most regressive things I've ever seen them do, which is cut support and funding for maintenance grants. They tried to do that by a committee of 19, 20 people. We forced them to publish an equality impact assessment. We forced them to have not 1, not 2, but 3 votes in the Houses of Parliament on it. We lobbied MPs. We made the DUP break an electoral pact that hasn't been broken 25 years to vote against the government. We did good work on that. We lost it. It's shit. but we did good work on it. Number 2 is DSA cuts, which we delayed by 2 years and have actually forced the government to prove how they're going to support institutions to be able to replace that funding. So again, we had a positive impact there. The third one is on the TEF. Again, this was at NEC, so not a national conference. Those who don't know, NEC is a National Executive Council. They're a bunch of elected students who get elected at national conference. Again, I wasn't happy with the stance that the National Executive Council took. What actually happened at national conference 2 weeks ago, one of the worst ones, etc., was we voted to engage with the government to make sure that we can ensure that whilst we don't necessarily like the TEF, that we can get the best deal for students. So for instance, we're trying to make sure that getting a good score in TEF, which is Teaching Excellence Framework, for those who don't know, isn't linked with the rise in fees. So it's trying to stop fees going up. And we've actually been pretty successful at that. So on all 3 of those things, I think we've made a really significant impact on the government. You haven't won everything, you don't win everything. But to say that we're not doing stuff and winning for students, I think is a bit wrong.
Okay, we've got to go back to the audience.
No,
Go back to the
please,
audience. Go back to the audience.
Okay, so I'm on committee for the University of Exeter Debating Society. One of the things that I see in the news a lot nowadays, and one of the things that's given me serious cause for concern with the NUS, is its continued stance on no platform policy. The no platforming of, known activists, respected people like Jermaine Greer, Peter Tatchell. How is it, as a member of a debating society, as a member of a body which deliberately wants to challenge students' opinions, get controversial people in, and have debates, how can I reasonably be confident that the NUS is actually encouraging academic diversity? Because I don't think that being at university is all about having your opinions validated. I think being at university is about having your opinions challenged, and it's going to be challenged by people who are not always going to be comfortable with. How can I, in my capacity as committee member of the debating society, where my job is to book speakers who are going to challenge people academically, how can I be confident in the direction the NUS takes and the stance it takes, particularly referring back to the threats made to Durham University, threats made to Cardiff University? These things give me serious cause for concern about the NUS's support for free speech and academic inquiry.
Sure. So a couple of things. One is that I am a Vice President of NUS and I'm very happy to debate anyone and everyone. I think I've proved that tonight, hopefully. Number 2 is, and I said this on television on Monday, that Peter Tatchell, Jermaine Greer and Julia Bindle, they have not been no platformed by NUS or anyone else. Again, I'd like to just draw the distinction between NUS as a body and students' unions. Students' unions get to decide who comes to the house party. As I said to Peter Tatchell, he wasn't invited to the house party. That's literally what that was. No platform policy, just for those who don't know. It specifically came out in the 1970s, which was around fascist and racist groups on campus. There are 6 organisations, not individuals, organisations, who come under the democratically decided no platform policy in NUS. Like I said, NUS, not students' unions, where all these examples are coming from. They include the English Defence League, they include Hizb ut-Tahrir, they include people of that ilk. So it's nothing to do with Jermaine Greer, Peter Tatchell, all those people. There is a really interesting debate happening, and this is where I guess I steer away from the line slightly in terms of like the NUS line. There's a really interesting debate happening about freedom of speech, what it means, and what it doesn't. I am very happy to debate anyone and everyone. Some people just don't want to go to a thing, and that's okay. That's not no platform, and that's not safe spaces. Sometimes we just turn down invites and stuff because we don't like the people, because we're busy, we've got to wash our hair, whatever. So I guess the thing I would say is that the final thing I would say is that there are thousands, and I mean hundreds of thousands, debates and discussions and all sorts of stuff happening in students' unions every single week, because there are 600 of them, there are loads of societies and so on and so forth. We, every now and again, once every like 2 or 3 months, a very specific example comes up of stuff that went wrong, or that the media get themselves whipped up into a lather about. Goldsmiths is one, I hear Warwick quite a lot, I hear Durham quite a lot. Like I said before, I don't know what happened like 3 years ago in Durham, so I can't defend that. If that happened, that's shit. On NUS and on NUS and students' unions, NUS are separate to students' unions. We don't make the decisions for them. And actually, there's like one example of the thousands and thousands of stuff. I don't think this is an epidemic that people are saying. I would rather spend my time talking about how we save students money, how we give them more power, how we campaign on stuff. But I keep getting asked questions on things like no platform, and I'm not no platform in this debate. I'm happy to have it with you. I just think there are more important things.
Okay. So, and Charlie?
So, Richard, on TV, you said you support a no platform policy, first of all, and you also said that some people have more equal rights than others, which doesn't make any sense. Moving on, and for me, it's a culture thing. When you start having for me, it's a top-down culture thing. If you start having an NUS that is saying, okay, we have a no platform policy, then it can be easily extended then it's then validated then in student unions. And for example, the NUS LGBT officer, Fran Cowan, I believe, she was the one who said, I refuse to share a platform with Peter Tatchell for alleged transphobia, for which no evidence has still been provided. And I think it's this culture that comes from the NUS that says, students, you have to be protected from so-called dangerous ideas. And I think that we should be vehemently opposed to. Let's take the Oxford Union, for example. They have hosted some quite despicable people, such as Tommy Robinson of the EDL and Marine Le Pen. But what did students do? They went along and they challenged these speakers, and they were utterly humiliated by engaging in a debate and a discourse. The EDL is a no-platform organisation with the NUS. Why is the NUS so insistent on this policy when it actually, I think, hinders debate and actually exposing fascists for who they really are?
Yeah, if I...
Do you want to respond to that?
No, I was going to...
I've got a really quick point to make. This debate, what we're discussing now, is really important. But I just want to make one thing clear, is that the Guild, and I've seen a lot of people tweeting about it, the Guild doesn't have a no-platform policy. So that's an example of where the NUS has something that we don't have, and we are autonomous. We're not bound by this policy. We can direct it, but we're not bound by it. So I just want to make that really clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the problem isn't necessarily, I think the problem is less to do with a very particular, and I think the NUS's no-platform policy is very particularly technical. But when we talk about the no-platform policy, we do mean the atmosphere. We mean the fact that Frank Cowling feels it acceptable to tell event organisers that they are not allowed to hold an event with Peter Tatchell because he's transphobic. It's when NUS campaigners feel that it's okay to tell organisers of an event that you're not allowed to do an event with Nick Lowe. It's when event organisers get emails from National Union of Students organisers saying we will send in protesters by the busload to stop this event going forward. It's that culture. And the problem is that culture then gets worse and worse, and it spills over. I'm going to bring up the Goldsmith example with Mandy Mazzi, when she went to speak in December. The Islamic Society, the LGBT Society, and the Feminist Society there all said that it was okay what the Islamic Society was doing, because Mandy Mazzi, by hosting, and I've emphasised this, by the AHS there, by the Atheist, Humanist and Secular Society organising their own event on campus, the Islamic Society said their own safe space was being infringed because of this event. Now, this is the problem. It's when you start, these policies begin, and they begin with the idea of not letting the EDL be able to run rampant on campus. But what they've become under the current NUS is they become an excuse to essentially not let people you don't like speak.
Okay, I'm going to do that. So we're now going to draw the open questions to a close. We're just going to finish up with 2 minutes from each side with some final remarks. And to start us off, Charlie Hawkins.
Thank you. So firstly, I just want to address some of the fear-mongering of the Guild is going to go down, essentially. I think with regards to fees. Okay, Gareth Orton, the head of membership services in the Students' Guild, has said no department will be closed. There will be nothing that radically changes the way the Guild works. I mean, there's been no independent audit report either. And as far as your co-op goes, your co-op discounts go, on the NUS website it says you can be not a member of the NUS and you can still register for an NUS Extra card. The Guild can still sell NUS Extra cards. So your co-op discount, if you really want to shop there, will be maintained. Good order. Second point, I think it comes down to the reform argument. The reform argument. It's always been about reform. Can we reform NUS? And I think Steve and I and the Leave campaign, Exeter, has said that NUS is going in a direction that is moving away from what the median, I don't know what, volunteer median student, but average students are completely disagreeing with what the direction NUS is going in. Is that 2 minutes?
That's 1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. And also, as we see, I mean, when it comes to Jewish students as well, I mean, just getting rid of any Jewish representation on the anti-racism and anti-fascism, and having an NUS president that has said, and this has got nothing to do, by the way, we've been accused of Islamophobia, this has got nothing to do with her identity, or race, or religion. The only people who are making it about that is some people on the state campaign. This has got everything to do with ideas, beliefs, and values. And I would say to that, is that when she says things like, the University of Birmingham Jewish Society feeds into a Zionist outpost, that there is a Zionist-led media or agenda, which has the implication that Jews have too much power, I think, in the country. I think that is something that we should be very careful of. And I'd be interested to hear Richard in his final speech what he thinks about the President-elect and some of her previous views. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, you're cutting into my 2 minutes here. I didn't vote for her. I think some of the things she said are troubling, and I think there are some legitimate concerns that people have raised. She's beginning to try to address them. She's not pressed for the next 3 months, and I think I'm going to give her the opportunity to try and answer those questions. Going on to the next stuff. I think the answer, the thing that I would say is that I think we've proved that NUS has done really good work in the past. I hope we prove that NUS continues to do good work. I would like to hope that we have shown that NUS would be lesser without Exeter Guild, and that I think Exeter Guild would be lesser without NUS, and whether or not we can talk about the money or we can talk about the national voice. And I think the question isn't about whether or not NUS can or will reform. I've said repeatedly that we are doing a number of different things that literally at this point we could not reform, whether or not that's our democracy, our membership contribution model, our affiliation fee model to you guys, the way we run campaigns, so on and so forth. The question is, how will this affect Exeter students? And that's the answer that no one from the other side has been able to give. And actually, that's because the only answer that there is that you will be worse off, that you will have less funds, that the students' union will be less strong, that you will have less of a national voice, and that if you believe, like me, that NUS has done stuff that isn't okay, that the direction isn't necessarily the one you would buy into, and I appreciate that as a re-elected officer of NUS, by the way, then I would suggest engaging with us this year, coming to National Conference next year, and helping us make NUS what we know it can be. And that's how I'd like to finish. Thank you very much for...
Thank you very much for joining us for the debate this evening. Just a big round of applause to all our panellists, Charlie Evans, Stephen Hawkins, Laura Jane Tiley and Richard Brooks.
Round.